In this video, I'm going to show you step by step how to create a chat system in Bubble just like this one. Alright, so before starting, let's analyze the chat component to see what it is made of. As we can see, we have the chat component itself with its UI, and then we have on the left a list of conversation, and when I click on this conversation, we can see that I have a list of messages displaying. Conversations will have at least two participants that are users, but they can have many more in the event where you want to create a group conversation for a company, for example. Also, these conversations will have a list of messages that have been sent by the participants that you will display into your conversation itself. Then we have the messages that are the little chat bubble that we can see here. So they have a sender, which is the user that sent the message. They also have a text content, and they can have many more fields based on your needs, such as attachments, images, videos, and whatsoever. Now that we know this, we can go into our database, into Bubble, and we are going to create our database by first starting by creating our messages. As I said earlier, they have a sender, which is of type user, and which will be unique. And then we can have at least text content, that will be text, but you can have many more fields, such as attachment, if you want to have attachment on your message, which are going to be type file, images, or whatsoever. Now that we have our messages, we need to have conversations. So let's create them, conversations. These conversations will have a list of participants that are users, so let's create it. Participants that are user, and don't forget to check the checkbox that says that this is a list. Also, they will have a list of messages that are the messages sent by the participants. So it will be of type messages, which is the data type that we created earlier. And that is a list as well. And there we go. That's pretty much all we need in our database to create our first basic chat system in Bubble. But obviously, you can add any more fields depending on the functionalities you want to add in your app. Alright, now that we have our database, we can focus on building the UI of our chat. In this video, we are going to focus more on the behind the scenes, so the backend and the functionality and how it works, rather than on the front end. So to save a lot of time, I'm going to use a pre-made chat component from NoCodable Components library. So I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it on my page. If you want to try out NoCodable Components, it's a component library from Bubble. It has more than 350 ready to use and fully responsive components for Bubble. So if you want to try it out, you'll find the link in the description. In this case, the component comes from navigation workflows, selection workflows, etc., but is not tied to our database because it's been pasted from an external source. So as we can see, it is fully responsive. We can navigate into the chat, etc. So now all we need to do is to tie our database to this UI and then add a few workflows to create the conversation and send messages. Alright, so first we are going to work on displaying the list of conversation our user, the current user, is participating in. So this is on the left of our screen, and if we take a look at how it is built, you can see that we have a repeating group, which is the repeating group conversation list. Inside of it, we have another group, which is a group conversation tile that is of type row, with a profile picture and a few more information. So basically the first name of the participants and maybe the last messages that have been sent and the time of the last messages. So how we are going to do that? So first we are going to update the data source of the repeating group. So I'm going to be displaying conversations from my data type, from my database, and to retrieve the right conversation, I'm going to use a do a search for conversation, and I'm going to take only the conversation the current user is participating in. So I'm going to add participant contains current user. This way I will only display the conversation when the current user is participating. Now that we have our search, our repeating group, we need to make this data communicate all the way down to our text element so that we can display the right things. So now that we have this, we need to make sure that every group between our text element and the repeating group have the right type of content and that we are passing the current sales conversation all the way down. So let's update that. We're going to make it conversations. Here I have a profile picture, then conversation on this group as well, conversation on this group as well. And now that I have passed the data all the way down to the text element, I can access the parents group conversation, and now I can say participant, each item, first name. This way, it will display the first name of each participant. So, for example, if John and Tim are participating in the conversation, I'm going to have John and Tim. This way. So, if we take a look at our preview, you can see that now I can refresh my page, and I have the list of conversations. So I have John, Jane, Elon, and Tim. Obviously, I forgot to mention, but to illustrate this, I created a few conversations from my database with a few messages as well. But if you don't need that, feel free not to do it. This is only to illustrate that it is working in the video. So now that we are displaying the correct list of conversation, we need to be able to select a conversation to display its messages. So basically, we want to click on a conversation here to display the messages here. And to do this, we are going to use a workflow that, when we click on a conversation, will send this conversation into the group holding or repeating group. So basically, this is my group write main display, the one containing all the messages and the conversation, the active conversation. We are going to set a type of content on this group. So this will be a type of content conversation, which is the same data type that we are displaying into this repeating group. And we are going to add a workflow to the group holding a conversation. I'm going to click edit workflow. I have this step that are only for navigation, so won't need it. So I'm going to use a display data in a group pop-up. I'm going to select the group I want to display the data in, which in my case is group write main display. And I'm going to send the current cell conversation. So basically, with this, Bubble knows that when I click on the conversation, it needs to display the right data to send this data into this group. So now that we have this, we can do a lot of things, such as formatting the active conversation into our list of conversation. This is useful to say to the user what conversation is being displayed. So how do we do that? We can use a simple condition that will say that when group write main display, which is the group that we sent the data in, conversation is current cell conversation, then we can change the background color, the border, etc. It depends on you. So this way, we can refresh it. And when we are going to select a conversation, for example, John and Enol, we can see that the color has changed because the conversation being displayed into this group is the one here. Okay, so we have our list of conversation. We are able to select conversation to display the messages. Now we need to actually display messages. So how do we do that? If we take a look at the UI, we can see that I have a repeating group messages, and inside of this repeating group, I have two groups, a group sent by and a group received. So basically, we are going to show the group received when the sender of this particular message is not the current user, so the message is received. And we are going to show this group when the sender of this message is the current user, so that I sent this message. Why do I use two groups? Because I think it's easier to maintain and easier to style the components accordingly, depending on who receives the message. You could also use a conditional to style it like you want, but I think it's more difficult to understand and less easier to maintain. So first, we need to update our repeating group message. So this is the repeating group displaying the list of messages. So obviously, our type of content is messages. This is the data type that we created in our database earlier. And the data source is the messages from the active conversation. If you remember, we sent the active conversation into the group holding the list of messages. In my case, this group is named group write main display, so I can select group write main display conversation, and then I can go all the way down to messages. And there we go. So now this will display the list of messages from the active conversation. All I need to do now is to make sure that this data is going all the way from the repeating group to the text messages, so the chat bubbles themselves. So I'm going to go ahead and select my group sent by user. I'm going to update the type of content, messages. I'm going to update the type of content as well. And you can see that each time I'm displaying either the current sales message or the parents group message. And there we go. And now I can go into my text element, which is the element that will display the content of the message. And I can select the right field, so actually text content. And I can also update the profile picture of this. So I can select parents group message, sender, which is the user that sent this message. And I can select, for example, its profile picture. And now I can do the same for the group received. So as you can see, messages, and now I can go into the text and select text content, and as well the parent group sender profile picture. And there we go. So now our messages are going to display correctly. However, we need to make sure of one last thing, is that we need to add a condition so that we only show the group received when the message is received, and to only show the group sent by when the message is sent by the current user. So how do we do this? We simply add a conditional that we say that when current cell message sender is current user, so that the message has been sent by the user reading this conversation, then we make this element visible and we hid this element by default, so that we unchecked this element is visible on page load, and we checked collapse when hidden so that it doesn't take any space when it is hidden. And now we can do the same here for the group received, so it's hidden by default. And then I can add current sales message sender is not current user. This element is visible. So let's take a preview at what we've built. We can see that we have our list of conversation. All right. So if I select this conversation, for example, you can see that it's displaying the messages correctly. And same here, it's displaying other messages, and I can switch between conversation. This one doesn't have any messages, but I can switch between conversation and display the right information. All you need to do now is repeat the steps to display the right name here and the right profile picture, and then you'll be good to go. Obviously, now we need to be able to send messages. How do we do that? So basically, we are going to use the text input that is at the bottom here, along with this button, and we're going to create a workflow that will first create the messages and then make change to the active conversation to add these messages to the list of messages sent by the users. So how do we do that? We are going to go ahead and add a workflow onto this button, and as I said earlier, we are going to create a new thing. This thing will be a message, and we are going to set the required fields, so basically the sender and the text content. So the sender is the current user, and the text content is the text that has been typed into my input. So right now it is not renamed properly. I'm going to do it. Input text message. I'm going to fetch back my workflow, and then I can put this here, input text message value. So this has created the new message. Now that we have created this message, we need to add it to our conversation to be able to display it correctly. So how do we do that? I'm going to make change to thing. The thing we are going to modify is the conversation being displayed, so the active conversation. If you remember correctly, this conversation is displayed into the group that is holding our messages. So in my case, it is named write main display. So I'm going to select it, conversation. Now, I told Bubble that we are going to modify this particular conversation, so I can go ahead, change the field, messages, I'm going to add a message, and the message we are going to add is the one that we've created in step 1, which is this one. And finally, we are going to reset relevant input, so that the text message input is cleared after we sent this message. So now we can preview what we've built. So I'm going to refresh the page. I'm going to select the conversation, for example, this one, and I can send the message. It seems to be working fine. All right, so now we're able to send messages. Finally, we need to be able to create a new conversation. So this is what we are going to do. So now, last but not least, we need to be able to create a new conversation to send messages to other people, obviously. So I'm going to add a button here to create a new conversation. I'm going to select this, I'm going to put it there, set it to row, and then set this to the middle. And I'm going to modify this as well. I'm going to take this icon and I'm going to rename it. So group plus new conversation. All right. I'm going to add some spacing between the two. Let's say 8. All right. So now we are going to use a pop-up that I've created earlier in order to select participants and then create a new conversation. So here's how it looks. if we take a look at our pop-up, this I don't need. If we take a look at our pop-up, we can see that we have a search input that we can use to search for people, search participant, to rename it correctly. And then we have here a repeating group that is displaying a list of users that we are going to select in order to add to the conversation. So first of all, let's create our flow to display this pop-up, to show it. So I'm going to show an element in this pop-up, and then I'm going to go into the pop-up and actually display a list of users. So depending on your app, you will have to do a few more things, such as modifying privacy rules, adding some constraints into the search, etc. This is a basic example, but you will have to adapt it based on your application. So in this case, I'm going to do a basic search. I'm going to search all users because it is a test app, and I'm going to make sure that the data is going all the way into my groups. And then I have a little group that is holding a feather icon, which is white, that we are going to update when this user is selected. So the first thing here will be to be able to select one or more participants to add to this conversation. So to do this, we need to be able to store a list of users. Basically, we are going to create a custom state. You can add it anywhere, but I'm going to add it to the pop-up. I think it's clearer. And we are going to name it, for example, participants to add. And this will be a list of users. Now that we've done that, we need to be able to add or to remove users from this list. To do that, I'm going to select the group displaying users, so I mean my repeating group is the group directly below. I'm going to add our flow, and I'm going to use the set state of an element action. I'm going to retrieve my custom state, so it is attached to my pop-up. I'm going to participant to add, and I'm going to add this user to the list of users. So I need to take my custom state participant to add and use the plus item operator and add the current cell users. Now that it's done, I need to add a condition on this workflow to trigger it only when this user is not already in the list of users selected. So I'm going to use only when pop-up new conversation participants to add doesn't contain current cell user. Now that I've done that, I need to be able to remove this participant from the list of users. So I'm going to copy it and paste it and do the inverse. So if it's already into this list, I'm going to remove it with a minus item operator. There we go. So now I can select and unselect a user. All we need to do is to make some basic formatting to know when this user is selected or not, which is why I had this group. So basically I'm going to change the background color of this group when the user is selected. So I'm going to check my custom state participant to add, and when it contains the parents group user, I'm going to change the background color to, let's say, a blue. This way it will display the feather icon checked, that is white. So let's take a preview. So we can see that we have our button. I can display the pop-up, and now I can select users. So I can select as many as I want, and then I can unselect them. Okay, so now depending on your use case, you can go further and, for example, add a search functionality in order to search for a user based on his name, his username, etc. I'm not going to do that here. We are going to actually create a workflow to create a new conversation and add these participants to the conversation. So I'm going to revert. I'm going to add a workflow to this button create a conversation, and I'm going to obviously first create a new thing. The thing I'm going to create is a conversation, and I don't have any messages yet. We are going to send them after, but I have the list of participants. So the list of participants is stored into my pop-up, into the custom state we created earlier, pop-up new conversation participants to add. So this will add the user I've selected in the pop-up, but we need to make sure not to forget to include ourselves. So participant add current user. And there we go. Now we've created a conversation. So as soon as we click on this button, it will be created. All we need to do now is to reset our pop-up. So I'm going to reset my pop-up new conversation so that I clear it. And I'm going to hide the pop-up as well. And also I'm going to display data in a group pop-up in my right main display, which is the group holding my messages so that I display directly the conversation I've just created. So data to display, and this will be the first step of my workflow, which is the conversation I've just created. There we go. And now, if I take a look, so I'm going to refresh this. If we take a look, I can select a few users. Let's select one. For example, Bill Gates. I can click create this conversation, and as we can see, the conversation has been created. And I can send any messages I want to Bill, and Bill will be able to respond to me. And there you go. Now you know how to create a basic but functional chat system in Bubble. As I mentioned earlier, this system is pretty basic, but it's only in order to learn the basics, so feel free to build upon it and make it more complex depending on your app use case. I hope you liked it. Don't forget to like and to subscribe. See you!